Now let's add some wood to the wood pieces of our character. So we've got the cowl, we've got the belt, and some of the side pieces, and these are going to exist on the wood texture set, which you can see all the pieces of that here. So what we can do now is go ahead and into the smart materials, there are several different kinds of wood. And of course, you can always also go to substance source to look for different woods there. And it's nice because we can just drop several of these on at once and kind of see the different effects. Okay, so it gives us a chance to see the different looks on our model. This is really, really rough, and I don't think it goes with the character, so I'm probably not going to use that one. This one, same kind of thing. It's really, really, it's raw, which could be kind of a cool look to have a raw wood, but I feel like it's a little bit too rough as well. And so I really like this one, but it's a little bit too red. And so we can go into the folder and you can see there are several different layers here. Let's scroll down to base, and the base, we have a gradient here for the base. And so I'm going to choose some different colors and maybe kind of desaturate some of that a little bit. You can see that happening there. And then let's go on this color and sort of desaturate that as well. And that's probably a little bit too much. So let me add some color back in. Okay, so something like that. We can also go into these different layers. Here's the wood fibers, and you can see the scaling that we have here. So we could increase or decrease the scaling amount. Maybe set that to 3. Here's our medium wood fibers. Maybe scale that up to 3 as well. And our wood fibers small. You can see what all those indicate. If you want to blend some of those fibers out a little bit, you can do that. We do have some dirt, creating some darkness in the crevices there, which is nice. We can also bring in a fill layer, and let's just drop it in the curvature map, and we'll blend it over the top and use a soft light, and then dial down the intensity just a little bit. Okay. And it's still, I don't like the grain as much. So I'm going to come to the base, and I'm going to scale this up a little bit more. And I want to kind of de-emphasize some of the grain. So I'm actually going to add another layer. So let's add a fill layer. I'm just going to add it at the bottom. And on our base color, I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of a yellowy kind of a color, kind of like that. And I'm going to blend this bottom part down a little. And then on all these fibers, I'm going to take the visibility of those down just a little bit. Those are already down pretty far. So it's a little bit more like that. Now I do want to still have the red, so I can come in here and play around with the color that I'm blending with. That's kind of more of the look that I want right there. Something like that. And then if you want to paint some extra kind of dirt or anything on there, you can do that as well, just with another paint layer. So now we have all of our textures created in Substance Painter. Before we export any textures out in the next clip, let's take a look at some of the ways where we can really get a nice view of our models as we're working. So up to this point, we've been using the HDR lighting from an image, but we haven't really modified any of the post effects yet. And so we're going to come into the display settings. And if we come down, you can see there's a shadows checkbox, or we can turn that on. And the shadows from the light will start to be added to our scene. Here we can control the environment, which is using this panorama image. We can rotate it, we can blur it out, we can see the actual environment. You can see it's blurred out, so we could unblur it so you can see the actual image that's being used. Okay, we can also come down to the post effects, turn those on, and we could use things like vignetting. And so turn that on, increase it, and you get a nice black vignette around the edges of your frame, which can create it kind of a really dramatic effect. Okay, and this is just for viewing here inside of Substance Painter. But if you're working on a project and you need to get a quick image out and you don't have time to go into your game engine or into your renderer, you can quickly create an image from here. You've also got, in addition to painting mode, you've got iRay where you can render this out as well, which will be a little bit nicer of an image. We can also choose to add depth of field if we want. We scroll that open. There's anti-aliasing, we've got subsurface scattering, lots of different ways that we can change the display. Now, if we come up to the camera, if we have depth of field on, as you can see here, we'll need to come up to our camera and decide our focal distance. So let's dial the aperture up a little bit, and then let's dial this focus distance down, and you can see right there is kind of the face. We can kind of dial this aperture back. And depending on your model, if it goes off into space a little bit, you'll see that a little bit more dramatically. And so, but you can see this is kind of out of focus, whereas the face is more in focus. And so you can play with those effects as well. You can just turn that off and you're back to where you were. All right. So the post effects are a really cool way of getting a nice image here. Usually I'll have those some of those things off as I'm painting, but maybe at the end go in and check and see how things are looking. So let's do any last minute fixes here. If you wanted to come in and let's say go to the body and go into maybe the jumpsuit, and let's add a new layer in there. Go to paint, right click, turn everything off but height, make that height a little bit higher. You could come in and start to add and get a nice soft brush there. You could start to come in and add some additional wrinkles. So if there's any wrinkles that weren't added kind of in the sculpt, you could come in and add those. And I'm just going to do this really, really roughly. And be in here. So, something like that. Okay, now those are too sharp, and so I'm going to add a quick filter, and that's going to be a blur filter. All right, so we can blur that out and just add them back in just a little bit if you want to add some extra level of detail on there. Now you can see we've got an issue on the roughness of this part, so let's take a look at that while we're here. Yeah, so we can see we've got some paint there probably from this dirt. Yep. And so we need to make sure that we mask out this particular area. All right, fixed up. Then we've got our wrinkles on there. So things like that, there's always time to go back in and modify and change things wherever you want to add. That's the great thing about Substance Painter. It's so flexible. You can go into any of your texture sets, go in and modify things, change colors really, really quickly. You don't have to worry about editing a texture map, right? You're editing these different layers. And then in the next clip, we'll show you how Substance Painter takes all the stuff that we've piled together and created to get the look that we want and export those as textures that we can actually use in whatever application that we're using. In this case, we're going to be bringing this into Unity as Now that we have our creature textured, let's export those textures so that we can use them in a real-time application. In this case, we're going to be using Unity. So the first thing that we'll do is you can export your mesh from Substance Painter. Obviously, we imported this FBX into Painter, and so you can use that FBX if you want, but you can also come up to File and go to Export Mesh. You can see you can decide whether to apply triangulation. It recommends that you triangulate your model when exporting. So we'll go ahead and export this with the default options. And I'm going to actually drop these into the Unity project. And so let's change this from an OBJ to an FBX. And then I'm going to click into the Unity project under Assets. And I have a Models folder that I'm going to drop this into. This will be included, the Unity project will be included in your project files. But really, if you need to, you can just go in and grab the FBX from there, or you can use the FBX we imported into Painter as well. So I'm going to call this something like Creature Export. And putting it into the Models folder, we'll go ahead and save. All right, now we need to export our textures. So right now you can see we don't really have textures per se. So if we look on the body, we don't have a color map. We don't have a roughness map per se. We're looking at a bunch of different layers that are all working together to create the look that we have. Now, if we look in here, we kind of can see the result of all of that. But what we want to do is export actual texture maps that we can plug in to whatever application we're using, in this case, Unity, to make sure that our model looks as close as possible to what we have here. So let's go ahead and export those. We'll go to File, Export Textures. All right, so we've got a few tabs here. We've got our list of exports, which will show the different exports that we create. The output templates, which is where we can look at the actual templates and see what files and maps are associated with each of those templates. So for instance, this PBR metallic roughness is kind of a basic template. And so you can see we have base color, roughness, metallic, normal, height, and emissive. In this case, we've added emissive. We also, if you went through the film course, we had the Arnold template. But what we want to do is use Unity. And if you come down to Unity, there's the HD render pipeline and universal render pipeline. And then also it's split into metallic versus specular workflow. Now, if you look at all of these, you can see there's some differences. So if we look at the universal and the HD render pipeline, you'll see that we only have 4 maps. And you might be thinking, well, I don't get that because we have a lot more channels that we need to output. So what's happening is we have the base map, which contains the color here, and then also the opacity in the alpha map. And then inside of this one, which if we come back over here and come to the right, which is called mask map, and this actually contains a lot of different information. So in the red channel, we have the metallic information because it's, again, black and white, grayscale. In the green channel, we have the mixed ambient occlusion. And then in the alpha, we have the roughness or glossiness. It's kind of an inverse relationship. And then we have the normal map and the emissive. And so we have a lot of information contained in one file versus some of these other ones will have them separated into their own texture maps. So I'm just going to choose the Unity Universal Render Pipeline. You can see the maps that it's going to create here. You can also see the kind of texture file that you're going to create with these. Here you have a list of the different input maps and converted maps and mesh maps that you can use, and you just drop those over onto these different texture maps that you want to create. So we're going to stick with the existing template. And then if we go over to settings, we can see that we can click all of these different texture sets. If, for instance, we only want to output particular texture sets, we can define those here. We can also define an output directory. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And I want to go into that Unity project. And I'm going to put it into Assets, Textures. And we're going to select that as the folder. So I'm going to put mine there. If you're creating yours, you can put them wherever you want, but you want to be able to access them from Unity and pull those in to your project. All right, our output template, we want to switch and we want to choose our Unity, and let's choose our universal metallic. Go ahead and leave everything else as is. And then all we have to do from this point is go ahead and hit export. Now it's going to flip to that tab and show you as those different textures export for the different texture sets. You're going to see those here. It'll show you the exported files that have been created. All right, you can see all those separated based on the texture set and then also what they're called. Okay, if you see the word albedo, that's referring to like the diffuse color texture, the base color. All right, so we'll go ahead and quit out of there. We'll make sure to save this because if there are any issues, you can always come back, re-export your textures using a different format or a different bit depth and things like that. All of your data, the important stuff is in this painter file, and you can always output for another application. So for instance, you're using Unity right now, but let's say later on you actually want to use this project in Unreal. You don't have to change anything here. You just have to re-export your texture files to work with Unreal or with Arnold or with V-Ray or whatever it is that you're working with. So we'll go ahead in the next lesson and finish this whole thing up by going into Unity and bringing in our new object and our new texture maps and setting up materials. So we'll do that next.